A single dad janitor gave a lost locket to a mysterious man, unaware he was a grieving SEAL admiral who would repay his kindness tenfold. What was your call sign in your little fantasy world? Mop Bucket 1? The rain hammered down on the sterile windows of the naval base like 1,000 desperate fists, relentless and wild. Inside, the polished linoleum floors reflected the flickering fluorescent lights with a cold, unforgiving gleam, each long hallway a cavernous throat of sterile silence. Elias Vance moved through this silence like a ghost, his worn janitor's uniform a threadbare shield against the world's indifference. The rhythmic squeak of his cart's wheels the only sound that proved he was there at all. He felt the biting cold of the air conditioning seep through his thin shirt, a familiar chill that mirrored the hollow space that had taken up residence in his chest ever since Amelia was gone. The world had become a place of muted colors and muffled sounds, a heavy fog he had to push through every single day for the one small, golden glow that remained. His daughter, Lily. He could picture her now, her small form curled up under the thin blanket in their tiny apartment, her soft breath misting in the cool air, her dreams innocent and untroubled by the desperate calculations he made every hour. The worn receipt in his pocket for a half-gallon of milk and a small loaf of bread felt as heavy as a lead weight. It was a constant, crinkling reminder of how fragile their world was, how close they lived to the edge of a cliff he could never allow her to see. He worked with a quiet, dignified resolve, his movements economical and precise, a stark contrast to the weariness that haunted his pale features and the deep, unspoken grief that lived in the depths of his steady, unwavering eyes. He was a man made of brittle pieces, held together by a father's sacred, tender love. He was shattered. Admiral Theron Sterling stood in the ornate, cavernous expanse of his office, the polished mahogany desk gleaming under the amber hue of a single desk lamp. The relentless hammering of the rain against the bulletproof glass was a welcome distraction, a physical echo of the storm that had been raging inside him for 2 long, unbearable years. Lightning flashed across the sky, illuminating the vast high-ceiling room for a split second before darkness swallowed it whole, revealing the rows of medals and commendations that felt like monuments to his failure. He was a commanding figure, his uniform crisp and impeccable, his posture radiating an authority that could make generals falter, but inside he was a hollow man. His heart, once a source of unwavering strength, was now a shattered vessel, its pieces scattered on a dusty battlefield in a country whose name tasted like ash in his mouth. He picked up the polished silver locket from his desk, its surface cool against his trembling fingers. He clicked it open, the soft click echoing in the heavy silence. Inside was a tiny, smiling photograph of his son, Michael, his eyes full of the same fire that had once burned in Sterling's own. A raw, unspoken grief clenched his chest, tight and suffocating. This locket was all he had left, a sacred relic from a life that had been stolen, a life he had encouraged, a path he had paved. He had sent his own son into the fire, and the fire had consumed him. The guilt was a poison, slow and relentless. Total silence. Elias finished his final sweep of the administrative wing, the clean, antiseptic smell of the floor polish a familiar, grounding scent. He checked the clock. It was late, well past the end of his shift, but the storm was a living thing, a furious beast clawing at the building, and he had lingered, finding a strange comfort in the orderly, predictable nature of his work. As he pushed his cart toward the exit, a sliver of movement in the main parking lot caught his eye. Through the sheets of pounding rain, he saw a figure standing by a sleek, black sedan, a man silhouetted against the car's headlights. The man was soaked, his impeccable uniform clinging to his frame, his shoulders slumped in a posture of utter defeat. He was pacing back and forth, his head down, scanning the wet asphalt with a desperate energy. Elias recognized him instantly. It was Admiral Sterling, the base commander, a man spoken of in hushed, reverent tones, a figure of immense power and wealth who seemed more myth than man. But Elias didn't see an admiral. He saw a man lost in the storm, a man who looked as shattered as Elias felt. He saw a shared humanity in the man's frantic search. He hesitated for only a second. His own exhaustion was a heavy weight on his weary shoulders, the thought of his own warm, dry bed a powerful lure. But then he saw the Admiral's hand clench into a fist, his head dropping in a gesture of pure, unadulterated anguish. It was a look Elias knew intimately. It was the look of a man who had lost everything. That recognition was a bridge across the vast chasm of rank and status. He grabbed his small, cheap flashlight from his cart, its beam a weak but steady cone of light, and pushed the heavy glass door open, stepping out into the biting cold and the chaos of the storm. The wind tore at him, plastering his thin uniform to his skin instantly. The rain was a physical force, blinding and cold. He walked toward the Admiral, his worn boots squelching in the puddles. Sterling looked up as he approached, his eyes, usually so commanding, now hollow and haunted. "Can I help you, sir?" Elias asked, his voice quiet but clear over the roar of the wind. Sterling seemed to falter, surprised that anyone would approach him, let alone a janitor. I've lost something." The Admiral's voice was rough, cracked with an emotion Elias couldn't name. "It's a locket. It was my son's." The word son hung in the air between them, heavy and profound. Elias understood. He knew the unbearable weight of such sacred objects, the way they became anchors to a life that had vanished. He didn't offer empty platitudes. He simply nodded, his expression one of sincere, unwavering empathy. "Let's find it," he said. He clicked on his flashlight. The beam cut a weak path through the darkness. Without another word, at his own expense and without any expectation of reward, Elias got down on his hands and knees on the rough, wet asphalt, the cold water immediately soaking through the threadbare fabric of his trousers. He began to search, his fingers carefully probing the ground, his eyes scanning every inch of the rain-slicked surface. The Admiral froze. He watched, stunned into silence, as the stranger, this janitor who owed him nothing, knelt in the mud and the pounding rain, searching for a piece of another man's broken heart. It was an act of such pure, selfless kindness that it felt like a physical blow, a seismic shock that splintered the thick ice that had encased his own heart for 2 years. He saw not a cleaner, but a man of immense, quiet dignity. He didn't know it yet, but this moment would change everything. For what felt like an eternity, they searched in a shared, unspoken mission. The only sounds the relentless drumming of the rain and the squelch of Elias's hands on the pavement. The Admiral, moved by the janitor's profound decency, eventually knelt as well, the crisp fabric of his own ornate uniform darkening with mud and water. He felt a forgotten warmth spreading through his chest, a flicker of light in the cavernous darkness of his grief. This man's simple, unsolicited goodness was a balm to a wound he thought was fatal. Then, Elias's flashlight beam caught a faint glimmer near the tire of the Admiral's sedan. A small, silver object, half submerged in a murky puddle. "I think I have it, sir." Elias's voice was gentle. He reached into the cold water and his fingers closed around the locket. He stood up slowly, his knees aching, his body trembling from the biting cold. He held it out on his open palm, the silver gleaming against his skin. It was a simple offering, a treasure returned. Admiral Sterling stared at the locket, then at the man's face. He saw the exhaustion etched there, the paleness of his skin, the sincerity in his unwavering eyes. A sob caught in his throat. He took the locket, his fingers brushing against Elias's. The contact was brief, but it felt electric, a current of shared humanity passing between them. "Thank you." Sterling's voice was a raw whisper. The words felt inadequate, hollow. How could he possibly articulate the profound gratitude he felt? How could he explain that this man had not just found a piece of metal, but had returned a piece of his soul? Elias simply offered a small, weary smile. "I'm glad we found it," he said again. He turned to leave, to walk back to his cart and the quiet anonymity of his life, expecting nothing more. He was just a man who had helped another. It was as simple as that. The Admiral watched him go, his heart pounding in his chest. A renewed purpose began to bloom in the barren landscape of his soul. He had to know who this man was. He had to repay this undeniable, selfless act of kindness. He would not let it go. He would not let him vanish. The following morning, a deep, rattling cough echoed through the small, sparsely furnished apartment. Elias sat on the edge of his worn mattress, his body racked with chills, the dampness from the previous night having settled deep into his bones. His head thudded with a dull, persistent ache, and every breath was a painful effort. He had known, kneeling in that cold puddle, that he was risking this. A day's wages lost was a catastrophe, a small disaster that would ripple through their fragile budget for weeks. He looked over at Lily, who was still asleep in her small bed across the room, her chest rising and falling in a steady rhythm. A wave of guilt washed over him. He had to be strong for her, always. He couldn't afford to be weak, to be sick. He winced as he stood, his muscles protesting. He moved to the tiny kitchen, his movements slow and deliberate, and put the kettle on for tea. The soft hiss of the gas burner was a comforting sound in the quiet apartment. He looked at the single tea bag left in the box. He would save it for Lily. He would make do with hot water. He was used to making do. He was a master of it. The quiet resolve in his eyes hardened. He would get through this, just as he had gotten through everything else. For Lily, he always would. He was a father. Meanwhile, across the base, Admiral Sterling sat in his stately office, the recovered locket resting on the polished desk in front of him. The golden glow of the morning sun streamed through the window, but he didn't notice it. He had been awake all night. The image of the janitor's pale, sincere face burned into his memory. The man's selfless act had reawakened something in him, a sense of duty that went beyond military strategy and geopolitical concerns. It was a duty to honor goodness, to protect purity in a world that seemed determined to crush it. He had spent the early hours of the morning making quiet, commanding inquiries. He now had a name, Elias Vance. He had a file. It was thin, containing only basic employment details. Single father. Daughter named Lily. Perfect work record. Nothing else. It was the file of an invisible man, a ghost who moved through the hallways keeping the base clean. But Sterling knew there was more. He had seen it in the man's unwavering eyes, in his dignified posture. There was a story there, a history hidden beneath the threadbare uniform. A new, undeniable purpose had taken root in his soul. He would uncover that story, and he would find a way to repay the profound debt he now owed. He picked up his secure phone, his fingers dialing a number with crisp precision. "Get me Dr. Evans at the base medical facility," he said, his voice calm but powerful. "And find me a way to authorize a civilian staff bonus pool. Clerical error, perhaps. Make it happen." He hung up. A small, almost imperceptible smile touched his lips. It was the first time he had truly smiled in 2 years. He was on a new mission now. A week later, Elias was back at work, the last of his fever finally broken, though a deep weariness still clung to him. He was sweeping the corridor outside the base medical clinic when a notice on the bulletin board caught his eye. Free pediatric wellness checks for all civilian staff children. His heart gave a small leap. Lily had been coughing for weeks, a dry, persistent hack that worried him endlessly, but a visit to a doctor was a luxury he simply could not afford. This felt like a miracle, a gift from an unseen hand. He quickly signed her up, a wave of profound relief washing over him. The next day, he watched as a kind, gentle doctor named Evans examined Lily, her small face serious as she listened to the stethoscope. The doctor declared it was just a lingering bronchial irritation and prescribed an inexpensive but effective cough syrup. As Elias was leaving, the nurse handed him a small bag filled with children's vitamins and a gift certificate to the base commissary. "A new community outreach program," she explained with a warm smile. Elias was overwhelmed, his throat tight with unspoken gratitude. These small miracles, these unexpected acts of kindness, were like shafts of golden light piercing through the heavy fog of his life. A few days after that, his paycheck was larger than usual. A memo attached cited a retroactive bonus due to a newly discovered accounting error. Elias stared at the extra numbers on the receipt, his mind reeling. It was enough to cover their rent for the next 2 months and buy Lily a new, warm winter coat. He felt a sense of disbelief, a fragile hope beginning to bloom in his chest. He didn't know where this good fortune was coming from, but it felt like the world was finally giving something back. Felt like Amelia was watching over them. Admiral Sterling observed all of this from a distance, his secret interventions providing a quiet, profound satisfaction. He saw the relief on Elias's face when he left the clinic, saw the way his shoulders seemed a little less burdened. Each anonymous act of kindness was a small repayment for the locket, for the moment of human connection in the storm that had saved him from his own despair. But it wasn't enough. He felt an undeniable pull to connect with the man again, to understand the source of his quiet strength. He needed to hear his story. He orchestrated a meeting, arranging his schedule so he would be inspecting a remote and rarely used warehouse facility at the exact time Elias was scheduled to clean it. He found him there, in the soft hush of the cavernous building, dust motes dancing in the shafts of light from the high windows. Elias looked up, surprised to see the Admiral. He immediately straightened up, his posture becoming more formal. "Sir," he said, his voice respectful. Sterling offered a small, disarming smile. "At ease, Mr. Vance," he said, his tone gentle. "I just wanted to thank you again properly. For your help the other night." Elias simply nodded. Anyone would have done the same. Sir Sterling knew that wasn't true. "No," he said, his voice firm. "No, they wouldn't have." An easy silence fell between them, comfortable and unspoken. They were just two men in a quiet room. The vast difference in their ranks seemed to vanish, replaced by the shared memory of the storm. They began to talk. At first, it was about small things, the base, the weather, the quiet monotony of their respective duties. But Sterling, with careful, gentle questions, began to probe deeper. He steered the conversation to a small, empty break room at the back of the warehouse, a forgotten space with a flickering light and 2 worn chairs. He offered Elias a cup of coffee from a thermos he had brought, a simple gesture that felt significant. As they sat in the dimly lit space, the pretense of their roles melted away completely. Sterling looked at the hollows under Elias's eyes, the weary set of his jaw, and he recognized the familiar landscape of grief. He decided to take a risk, to offer a piece of his own shattered heart in the hopes of understanding Elias's. "That locket," he began, his voice low. "It belonged to my son. He was a SEAL. He was killed in action 2 years ago." He didn't elaborate on the details, but the raw pain in his voice was a confession in itself. Elias listened with steady, unwavering eyes, his gaze filled with a profound and sincere empathy that made Sterling feel truly seen for the first time in years. He didn't offer condolences or empty words of comfort. He simply sat there, his quiet presence a testament to his understanding. The silence deepened, filled with unspoken grief. It was then that Elias chose to reciprocate, to share his own tragedy. "My wife, Amelia," he said, his voice barely a whisper, the name a sacred, painful thing on his lips. "It was a car accident, 1.5 years ago. 1 minute she was here, and the next, she was gone." He looked down at his own hands, his knuckles white as he clenched them. "Now it's just me and Lily. I try to be enough for her. I try to make sure she remembers how much her mother loved her." He spoke of his struggles, of the loneliness, of the desperate fear of failing his daughter, his voice cracking with an emotion he had kept locked away for so long. A single tear traced a path down his pale cheek. Sterling's heart ached for him. He saw the immense weight this man carried, the unbearable burden he shouldered with such quiet, dignified grace. He reached out, not as an admiral, but as a fellow traveler in the land of the lost, and placed a hand on Elias's shoulder. The gentle, non-romantic physical contact was a powerful anchor, a gesture of shared sorrow that forged an undeniable bond between them. They were no longer Admiral and Janitor. They were 2 fathers, 2 widowers, 2 survivors bound by a shared, sacred grief. They had found solace in the most unlikely of friendships. A month later, the base hosted its annual Navy Ball, a grand affair held in an ornate, cavernous ballroom. Gleaming chandeliers cast a golden glow over the sea of crisp dress uniforms and elegant gowns. The air was filled with the soft hush of polite conversation and the gentle clinking of glasses. Elias was there, not as a guest, but as part of the civilian cleaning crew, tasked with remaining on standby in a discreet corner, ready to deal with any spills or mishaps. He felt invisible in his simple gray uniform, a ghost at the feast, watching a world of power and wealth that was not his own. He felt a familiar pang of loneliness, a stark reminder of the chasm between his life and the lives of the people in this room. He saw Admiral Sterling at the head table, looking stately and commanding, and a small, sad smile touched his lips. Their friendship was a secret thing, confined to quiet break rooms and empty warehouses. Here, in the public eye, they were strangers. Commander Thorne, a man whose polished exterior and crisp uniform failed to conceal a deep-seated arrogance, was holding court near the dessert table. He was a man who measured the world in ranks and status, and he viewed the civilian staff with a thinly veiled contempt. When a young, nervous waiter accidentally jostled his elbow, causing a drop of red wine to splash onto his immaculate white sleeve, Thorne's face contorted with fury. He turned on the waiter, his voice a low, vicious hiss. But his eyes quickly scanned the room and settled on the nearest, easiest target. "Elias, you!" Thorne barked, his voice sharp enough to cut through the din. "Cleaner, get over here. Now!" Elias moved forward quickly and quietly, his heart pounding in his chest. He knew this type of man, the kind who used cruelty as a substitute for strength. He knelt, dabbing at the small stain with a cloth, his movements efficient and professional. He remained dignified, his eyes downcast. But Thorne wasn't interested in a solution. He was interested in an audience. He wanted to perform his own importance. "Look at this incompetence," Thorne announced loudly, his voice dripping with disdain, drawing the attention of those nearby. "This is what happens when we allow just anyone to wander our halls. Can't even trust them to stand still without causing a mess." He looked down at Elias, a cruel sneer twisting his lips. He noticed the quiet stillness in Elias's posture, a subtle military bearing that seemed out of place on a janitor. It was an affront to Thorne's sense of order. He decided to escalate his public humiliation, to crush this man's quiet dignity completely. "You carry yourself like you think you're one of them," Thorne said, gesturing to the uniformed officers around them. "Playing soldier in your head while you push a mop?" He laughed, a short, ugly sound. "What about you, janitor? You look like you think you're a soldier. What was your call sign in your little fantasy world? Mop bucket one?" The words were designed to shatter him, to reduce him to nothing more than his lowly job. A few people nearby snickered uncomfortably. Elias froze. The insult struck a raw, hidden nerve. He remained silent, his jaw clenched, but a flicker of a deep, ancient pain shimmered in his eyes. He was overwhelmed, a wave of shame and anger washing over him. He felt utterly alone. But he was not alone. A calm but powerful voice sliced through the tension. "That's enough, Commander." Every head turned. Admiral Sterling was making his way through the crowd, his expression unreadable, his eyes as cold and hard as polished steel. The crowd parted for him as if by an unseen force. He came to a stop directly in front of Thorne, his commanding presence sucking all the air out of the room. A sterile silence descended upon the ballroom. Sterling didn't even glance at Thorne. His gaze was fixed on Elias, and it was filled with a profound, unwavering respect. "Mr. Vance," he said, his voice echoing in the hush. "This officer seems to have a question for you. I think you should answer him." Elias looked up, his eyes meeting the Admiral's. In that shared gaze, a silent and profound understanding passed between them. He saw permission. He saw support. He saw a friend. Elias slowly rose to his feet, his posture subtly shifting. The weariness seemed to fall away, replaced by an authority that had been dormant for years. He turned his steady gaze on Commander Thorne, his eyes unflinching. "My call sign," he said, his voice quiet but carrying the weight of 100 impossible missions. a voice that echoed with the ghosts of fallen comrades and the roar of helicopter blades. Was Lone Eagle? A sharp gasp rippled through the small circle of high-ranking officers standing nearby. The name hung in the air, electric and unbelievable. Lone Eagle. It was a legend, a ghost story whispered in classified briefings. The operator of a Tier 1 Special Missions unit, a man credited with dozens of heroic, impossible feats before he had simply vanished. Presumed killed in action or retired into absolute obscurity. Admiral Sterling's face was a mask of cold fury as he turned his attention to the now pale and trembling commander. Lone Eagle, Sterling repeated, the words like chips of ice. Captain Elias Vance, recipient of the Navy Cross for his actions during Operation Desert Talon. He paused, letting the weight of the title sink in. The man who single-handedly held off an enemy advance, allowing my son's unit to evacuate. The man my son called a hero in his very last letter to me. The revelation landed like a thunderclap. The power dynamic had not just been reversed, it had been utterly and completely annihilated. Thorne was speechless, his face a mask of disbelief and horror. Commander Thorne. The Admiral's voice was now a deadly whisper. You are addressing a man whose boots you are not worthy to polish. You will apologize to Captain Vance, and then you will consider your career over. You are dismissed, he froze. In the aftermath of the stunning revelation, a profound and cathartic silence enveloped the ballroom. Commander Thorne, his face ashen and his arrogance shattered, mumbled a barely audible apology before practically fleeing the room. The whispers that followed were not of mockery, but of awe and disbelief. Elias Vance, the quiet janitor, was suddenly seen in a new, brilliant light. He was no longer invisible. He was a hero. Admiral Sterling placed a firm, supportive hand on Elias's shoulder, a public declaration of their bond. Let's get you out of here, Captain, he said, his voice low and full of a warmth that was reserved only for Elias. He led him away from the gawking crowd, shielding him from the sudden, unwanted attention. He took Elias and, after making a quick call, his daughter Lily under his wing. The very next day, Elias was honorably discharged from his janitorial contract and offered a new position, one created for him by the Admiral, a senior civilian strategic advisor for special operations training. It was a role that utilized his unique, hard-won skills, a position of respect and importance. His past was no longer a source of pain to be hidden, but a source of strength to be honored. Sterling ensured that Elias and Lily were moved from their tiny, cramped apartment into a comfortable, stately house on the secure, quiet part of the base reserved for senior officers. It had a yard with a large oak tree and a swing set, a place where Lily could play without a care in the world, her laughter echoing in the sunlit air. The Admiral, having lost his own son, found a new purpose in becoming a grandfather figure to the small, bright girl who had her father's steady eyes and her mother's gentle smile. He would spend hours with her, pushing her on the swing, reading her stories, and listening to her endless, innocent chatter. He was healing a part of himself he thought had died with Michael. Elias, in turn, found in Sterling the father figure and mentor he had never had. The Admiral's gruff wisdom and unwavering support provided a foundation of security he had not felt since Amelia's death. They healed each other's grief, not by trying to replace what was lost, but by building something new and beautiful from the broken pieces. They forged a new family, bound not by blood, but by a profound, sacred bond of shared loss, mutual respect, and a deep, abiding love. The hollow ache in both their hearts began to fill, replaced by the warmth of belonging and the promise of a future filled not with despair, but with hope. 1 year later, the golden glow of a late afternoon sun filtered through the leaves of the large oak tree, dappling the green grass in shifting patterns of light and shadow. Lily's happy shrieks filled the air as she flew higher and higher on the swing, her small legs pumping with joyous effort. Elias stood nearby, leaning against the trunk of the tree, a soft, genuine smile on his face. He was no longer the gaunt, weary man who haunted the sterile hallways of the naval base. He wore a crisp, well-fitting polo shirt and trousers, and the haunted look in his eyes had been replaced by a quiet, confident peace. He looked healthy, rested, whole. He watched his daughter, his heart swelling with a love so profound it was almost painful. She was safe. She was happy. That was all that had ever mattered. Admiral Sterling sat on the porch of the house, a cup of tea in his hands, watching them. The rigid, commanding posture was gone, replaced by a relaxed, comfortable ease. The deep lines of grief on his face had softened, and his eyes, once so hollow, now held a gentle, paternal warmth. He was no longer just an admiral. He was a grandfather, a friend, a patriarch of this small, unlikely family. He caught Elias's eye and raised his cup in a silent toast. Elias nodded back, a look of deep, unspoken gratitude passing between them. They had saved each other. In the quiet dignity of a selfless janitor, an admiral had found a reason to live again. In the commanding compassion of a grieving father, a forgotten hero had found his way home. They were a testament to the undeniable power of kindness, a living proof that even in the deepest darkness, a single, unexpected act of goodness could reignite the light. The soft hush of the evening settled around them, a peaceful, sacred silence filled with the promise of many more days just like this one. They were home. This story is a powerful reminder that heroes are not always found in the spotlight, and that true strength is often quiet, dignified, and unassuming. It shows us that an act of selfless kindness, no matter how small it may seem, can create seismic ripples of change, healing wounds we cannot see and forging bonds that can save a life. Elias, in his quiet desperation, never lost his capacity for empathy, and in helping a stranger, he unknowingly saved himself and his daughter. Admiral Sterling, trapped in his cavernous grief, was awakened not by a military victory, but by a simple, human connection that reminded him of the honor and goodness that still existed in the world. If this story touched your heart and reminded you of the profound power of compassion, please let us know. These tales of hidden virtue and unexpected salvation are meant to inspire and uplift, to serve as a beacon of hope in a world that can often feel cold and transactional. We believe that stories like this matter, that they remind us of the best parts of our shared humanity. We invite you to like, share, and subscribe to Soulful Love Tales for more soul-stirring stories of love, redemption, and the extraordinary power of the human heart. Your support allows us to continue bringing these inspiring narratives to light, reminding us all that sometimes, the greatest treasures are found in the most unexpected places. We'll see you in the next one.